Um, Christendom is not the same thing as saying the church. When Jesus said, I will build my church on this confession of faith that you've just given, Peter, he did not say, I'm going to build the Holy Roman Empire, or he did not say, I'm going to build the state church of Scotland, or of Germany, or England, or whatever. My church did not mean Christendom. Christendom is something that began to come to be in the 4th century. So Christianity had gone from being a more or less slightly accepted religion, but with a very few people, to being the state religion of the Roman Empire by the end of the 4th century. And it has continued that way right up to, I would say, about the 18th or 19th century in Europe. And then it began to disintegrate. But what has pertained in North America generally is what people call a cultural establishment. That is an identification of the Christian religion with the basic values and procedures and ceremonials of the dominant culture. Now, lately, it has had some hard knocks. And all along the way, there were prophetic voices who didn't like to fit into that pattern. All over the Western world, the church, Christianity is being disestablished. In Europe, it's pretty well, in Western Europe at least, it's a pretty well accomplished thing.
I remember even, in the early 80s, mid 80s, you were, of course, on the lecture circuit. You were going into the states, including the southern states. And at that point, you were already saying, disestablish yourselves. And of course, you're talking in North America about a cultural establishment, not a state-established church. I mean, what does disestablishment mean? You've begun to describe it. Is this a good thing? Why would it be a good thing? Because this is not an obvious thing for those of us within the church, Barry and I, ministers on the front lines. Disestablishment, diminishment, is not fun. It's not easy. We look back, and our congregations look back to glory days, and they tell us, well, the Sunday school had this many children, and we had so many people in the pews, and reporters would come into the church, in the big churches, the big pulpits, to hear what the ministers are saying. This is no more. So can this be a good thing?
It's a painful thing, certainly. I worked in a church, in an Episcopal, there was an Anglican church in New York City. St. Michael's Church at 99th and Amsterdam was once the church of New York, of uptown Manhattan. That's where all the great Anglican families went, When I went there in 1953, St. Michael's Church still had an enormous endowment because it owned a cemetery in Long Island. And in this cemetery, very important families, including quite a few of the mafia families, were buried. And the great burning desire of the rector, when I was there, was to create a crematorium in the cemetery. That was the mission of the church, And this whole thing could go on, every Sunday we had processional, with a choir, wonderful paid choir, wonderful music. It was a beautiful church, a kind of Byzantine church with murals, and it had parlors and bowling alleys and God knows what. And yet there would be 80 people in a church, in a building that would seat 1,500. But we could do it because we had this endowment. I realized that something was wrong at that point. So how do you get rid of a cultural establishment? The answer is that's a work of theology. Because you have to start asking yourself, how does the message of the church differ from the message that this society, that mother culture, is giving off in our time? How does the message of the church play out? How does it dialogue with the message of our culture? For instance, our culture says the road to success is technological mastery. So let's everybody learn how to use these machines, and we'll have power then. Well, is the getting of power the main thing in life? What does it mean finally? You know, my name is Ozymandias, King of Kings. Look around and, you know, what does our power come to in the end? So how can we as Christians assess the nature of our culture? What is the nature of our culture, by the way? What is the Zeitgeist, as the Germans say? What is the spirit of the times? And how do we engage this spirit as Christians? How do we distinguish our message from the message of General Motors and company, you know? So that the work of disestablishment in our non-established, non-politically established situation is a work of theology.
The question for me is, when you get into at least for me, when I get into the day-to-day grind of ministry, when you have a sermon coming every Sunday and funerals and visits and all these other things, sometimes the last thing on your mind is discerning the times. You're just trying to keep your head above water without even trying to see where the wind is going at that point.
I know. I have great sympathy with what you're saying. I don't know how you do it. I don't think I could. No. Maybe if I were young. But I really think that, first of all, we have to help candidates for the ministry find out what time it is. What are the messages that they're getting from the movies, from the commercials, from the novels that people read, from the plays that they're watching, from the newspapers they're reading? What's the basic message that they're getting? Are they being told, you listen, unless you become a real great success, you're going to end up homeless or something? So get working and get as much education, and if you get a lot of education, you're going to be successful. But a lot of people with education aren't successful. So what is I'm looking for the questions beneath the questions, not just the question, what education should I get, but why do I need it, and what does it mean, by the way, education? What is that? What is wisdom? What is knowledge? So that's on the one side. What time is it? The other question that candidates have to be indoctrinated into is the tradition. And I don't think this is happening. Seminary education is only the very beginning of this process. It has to go on.
Discovering that, yes.
It has to go on. So so-called continuing education is not an option. It's something that we have to. I am still being educated as a Christian at 86.
Yes.
I know now how little I know, how bloody little I know. I'm not just being modest. I really mean that. I feel very stupid. Paul Tillich said there are three kinds of anxiety, three types of anxiety. The anxiety of fate and death, that belongs to the classical world of Greece and ancient Rome. The anxiety of guilt and condemnation, that belongs to the medieval age and also to the beginning of the Reformation. And the anxiety of meaninglessness. Emptiness and meaninglessness. This is a message that we get in all the drama that we have today. So, and if you can speak to that in concrete ways, you will get a hearing. Not with a lot of people, you won't get a lot, because it requires an enormous lot of honesty to admit that one feels there's no purpose. But many people in our society do feel there's no purpose. I grew up in the church, and it was very moralistic church in those days. You know, don't do that, don't drink and dance and have sex before marriage and so on. But really the Christian faith didn't become really, it didn't grip me until in my loneliness as a student of music in the city of Toronto, I read the book of Ecclesiastes. Vanity, vanity, saith the preacher, all is vanity. What comes of all our striving, and so forth. I thought, oh my God, is this in the Bible? And then I thought, well, if this is in the Bible, then perhaps I should pay attention to other parts of it too. But first I had to be put in touch with my own sense of emptiness and the vanity at age 21. Where was I going, and what is the purpose of it? Why am I doing this? And you find that many people in their 40s and 50s, this becomes a really existential question because they've tried to do something and they can't. How do we speak to this kind of hidden depression, this hidden nihilism? You've got to speak to people where they are. That's why I said the first job of the seminaries is to help students realize what time it is, what sort of a time they're living in, so that they don't go around perpetuating the answers of the classical church, or of the patriarchs, or the answers of the medieval theologians, Calvin and Luther and so on, or the answers even of the 19th century, but they try to get into our century, which is the most, because the anxiety of meaninglessness is the greatest of all the anxieties, because how can you put your finger on it?
Do you think that we are able to do things today as disestablished communities of faith that we could not do as established ones?
Definitely. As if we'll allow ourselves. Our failure has a certain advantage because we're surrounded by people who are failing. Most of them won't admit the degree of failure that they feel, the degree of meaninglessness of their pursuits. And there's an advantage of being sick, the wounded healer, If you're not wounded somehow yourself, you can't understand what it means to be wounded. So helping people in your congregation to enter the darkness of their lives, whatever that darkness is. Is it something with their children? Is it something with their marriage? Is it just a sense of nothing happening, boredom, and so on? Help them, go with them, take their hands and go into the darkness. There is no kind of serenity that is real except the serenity of those who have entered the hard place, the difficult place. The prayer of my teacher, Reinhold Niebuhr, is the best theology going. Give us the serenity to accept what cannot be changed. So to have that serenity, you must know what cannot be changed. Give us the courage to change what can be changed, and give us the wisdom to know the difference between them. That's a summary of theology, which is excellent for pastoral ministry, I would say. We are in a very, very difficult period. One way of speaking about this period is that it falls to us, that is, the thinking Christians among us, the educated, because the teaching elders, I use a good Presbyterian term, the clergy, the teaching elders, it falls to us to distinguish between religion and faith. Religion and faith. Bonhoeffer gave a wonderful analogy. He said, religion is the Tower of Babel. People are afraid, let us build a city with the tower reaching into the heavens because we're going to be scattered abroad otherwise, you know. So they reach up, they try to get hold of God, control the controller, you know. And what happens? They don't understand one another anymore because they're seeking for power which doesn't belong to them, and so they start being suspicious and jealous of one another. We know all about that in the city of Montreal. Yeah. Then Bonhoeffer said, but Pentecost is a very different thing. Here God is reaching down to the people who are confused and wondering where they're going to go next, these disciples. You know, we hoped that in Jesus something would happen, and it seemed not to have happened, and what are we going to do? So God is coming down, the Spirit appears, they begin to talk in strange tongues, but even if they're talking in strange tongues, they understand one another. Why? Because the basic alienation has been taken away. They're no longer reaching up, they're being reached down to by the compassionate God, and therefore they feel a greater compassion for one another. Now, this distinction between religion, grasping, Barth calls it grasping, and faith, which is receiving, listening, hearing, listening to something he told us that's good news. This distinction disappeared. The great theologians of the first part of the 20th century, that was one of their main themes. Barth and Tillich, they all talked about it. And that all disappeared, along with a lot of other things they talked about, because what was taken over in the theological world in the 60s and beyond, especially the 70s and beyond, were theologies of identity and cause. These are important things. Feminism and black theology and all those things were very important. Liberation theology, very important themes. But they ceased being an attempt at a comprehensive theology. And things got lost along the way. And one of the things that got lost was this wonderful, important biblical distinction between religion and faith. The religious people in the New Testament, the really religious people, are the ones that Jesus has trouble with. You know that from your study of the Scriptures. Now, people cling to these religious things because that's what they know. That's what in the past the church has been teaching. The church has not made this distinction for them because they thought everything that was religious was okay and was Christian. But everything that's religion is not. You know, the prophets of the Old Testament are railing against religion most of the time. Religion is their main topic of criticism. They're not there to support and keep religion going. No. They want God to be heard, not the religious authorities. I think the Bible is quite clear that the witnessing community, the disciple community, is never going to be anything very big and impressive. All the metaphors Jesus uses are metaphors of littleness. The salt is not a value in itself. Who wants a whole plate full of salt? The salt is there to do something for the food. The yeast is there to do something for the dough. The light is there to do something for the people in darkness. So it's a minority with a purpose that goes well beyond its own existence. It is there to witness to something which transcends itself and everything that it's talking about. But it's a minority. I think the Bible is quite clear, both in Old and New Testaments, that we're talking about minorities, a minority. And now we are being reduced to minorities. That doesn't mean that these are going to be great minorities. Some of them are just going to be, drop in the bucket, and who wants it, small can be beautiful, but small can also be just small. And our responsibility as teaching elders, or those who think they are teaching elders or whatever, we who are trying to understand and who've been given the privilege of trying to understand, what we have to do is try to help the small become beautiful.
You talk about small can be beautiful, and I have been a part of many, many congregations that have been very small, and yet they are such beautiful examples of people of faith living out being the church as best they know it. And now that I'm in the ordained ministry on a full-time basis, that doesn't change for me. We are a smaller church than Knox by far. We are 80 to 100 on a Sunday morning, and trying to convince that congregation that small can be beautiful and influential as salt and light and yeast and all these things we talk about is a task that is a steep task and not an easy one. And it is one that daily I look at and try to discern, how can we be the church in this place? And the question I always ask is, where is God already at work here, and how can we get in on that? And right. So that's the question I ask all the time. So I'll leave with that.
That is the right question.
Very good.
Where is God at work in the world, making and keeping human life human? Said Paul Lehmann, the great friend of Bonhoeffer. I wish I were in your congregation.